10:33, so anybody jumping on can jump in and, as we go. So I want to get started. I don't want to wait too long. So we decided to do the seller's disclosure today. And just because the market's so crazy, agents sometimes forget to read, or they don't read their listings, the disclosures on their listings, the disclosure changed. So there's a lot to do, and the disclosure is really so important that you can't just not read it or skip through it or skim through it. And I think what happens when there's issues, and if it goes to court, they always look at the disclosure and was it filled out properly? Who filled it out? Why did you accept it? That kind of thing. So I just kind of want to go over the disclosure again, and we're going to look at the disclosure today and show a couple of changes and just point out a few things and have a discussion. By the way, if anybody has any questions, certainly feel free to jump in. And then Kim is going to talk about Seller's Shield today when I'm finished going over the disclosure. So if you don't know, Seller's Shield is a free format that you can send to the sellers. They can they can fill it out. It's a fillable form. You can also pay for some other fees on it to do some things, but Kim's going to get into that a little bit. So does anybody have any questions on the disclosure before we even get started, or any thoughts or anything that ever bothers you about them? Okay. So I am going to jump right in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. And let's see. So I have the disclosure pulled up. And I think this was just updated. Let's see what it says in the date at the bottom there. March 21. So it's not that new. It's been a year, but it says REV 321, REL 721. So who knows? Anyway, it's been updated within the last year, and the one big change we'll get to. But let's talk about who has to fill out the disclosure. And, everybody talks about, well, if it's an estate, technically they don't have to fill out the disclosure. And sometimes you'll see a completely blank disclosure. However, if you're a seller or you have a listing and you have the seller, you do have to read this box that basically says, even though the executor or trustee is not required to fill out the seller's disclosure, they need to disclose any known material defects of the property. And listen, if it's a property where, it's an estate, their parents lived in it, they've been there, I mean, most likely they know if there's been anything wrong with the property, because they're probably assisting their parents with a roof leak or a plumbing leak or whatever it is. So if your seller says, oh, I'm an executrix, or I'm an executor, I'm not going to fill this out, there's some red flags if you know the situation. And trust me, if there's a neighbor, as soon as the buyer buys the property, the neighbor's going to be like, oh yeah, they were there and the kids were there and this happened and that leaked and this is a problem, and then there's problems. So just be honest. Just have the person who's the executor of the estate disclose whatever they know. Doesn't have to be in full detail, just whatever they know. And I do think sometimes a very well filled out disclosure means a lot more to buyers, because then they know the sellers are being honest. And then one more thing before we kind of get started with this. So it's very important. I've read some articles and watched some things over the years, and in the law continuing education classes, it's very important that you do not guide your seller. If you're the listing agent, you do not guide your seller in the wording of how to fill this out. You can maybe make a suggestion, but you have to tell them to put it in their own words. You can maybe say something like, hey, if the roof leaked, describe what you did to fix it. And if it hadn't leaked since, then go ahead and write that too. But don't quote, this is what you should write, and this is how you say it. This is what you should say. So be very careful with that, Because what'll happen is if you get sued, this is all a problem if you get sued. You're sitting in front of a judge. If you get sued and you're sitting in front of a judge, the seller's gonna be like, oh, well, my agent told me to write that. You're done. You're sunk. It's your fault. Also, the other thing that I've learned on that is never fill in for the seller. I don't care if they're 90 years old and can barely see. Have their children or somebody who's helping them fill it out. You should never ever fill something out for somebody. You shouldn't write it in. You shouldn't do a checkbox. Even if they forgot something and they say, oh, can you just check that for me? So easy, so tempting to just pop that check in. And I'm not going to say I haven't done it in the past, but if you get caught doing it, it's going to be on you because you filled it out for the seller. That was one of the things that really was discussed and at detail, that's how a lot of agents are getting in trouble. They're getting sued, they're getting fined because they filled it out for their seller. Any thoughts on that? Anybody have any situations where they were in and then somebody asked them to do that? Silence. Everybody's good. That's good. Okay, so we're going to continue. We're going to go on this. I just want to make sure you understand that. And so don't fill it in for your sellers. So I'm not going to go over every line by line because, it's 11 pages. We'll be here for hours. So you all should know this disclosure. And you all know that they did change this, that, everything's on here to the right or where the answers are. Yes, no. It's fillable here in this format, but it's not fillable when you send it out to somebody. So that's what the nice thing about Seller Shield, when we talk about that later, it actually is in a fillable format. So when you're having the seller fill everything out, just make sure they look at every line. And when they're done with it, you have to look at everything, make sure all the yeses or unknowns are checked. Just go through and make sure if they miss something, just tell them, fill in, line, whatever, line 59, line 60, make sure they fill it all in. And then they do ask when the property was acquired. If they know that, you can tell them based on public records if they don't remember when they bought it. Obviously list any animals that have lived in the property. I would just say on the condos, just go ahead and have them make sure they fill that information out as well, because that way a buyer, if they have any questions, they could call the condo association directly before they make an offer or during that process. And I would say roof, basements, whatever, infiltration. Look, be honest and tell them to be honest. And they can say, well, we only had water in the basement, for that one storm. What was that? Hurricane Ida, whatever, this past summer. And it hasn't leaked before. It hasn't leaked since. Do I need to disclose that? Yes, you do need to disclose that. And you can say to them, just describe what happened. And if there was any remedies to fix it, just put it in your own words and just fill it out and what happened. And look, people will be able to see, they'll be able to see water. And that's, as an agent, as you're walking through a property too, by the way, you should really be looking down in the basement, and especially if there's any wood components, to see if there's any lines or evidence of water down there. Now, we're not home inspectors, but we have eyes, we can see, and we do need to ask, hey, did you ever have water in the basement? Even if it was a long time ago. It was before this, the previous seller disclosed it. So whatever. You need to make sure that they fill all of that out. Let's see, termites, structural items, stucco. If you got a stucco house, obviously, you got to disclose that. I mean, it's pretty obvious there. I'm not going to get into a stucco discussion today. I'm going to talk about the additions and alterations, because this is sometimes where people get in trouble too. So sometimes people, if they're, say, like in a township where they require use and occupancy on a resale, they also have a gazillion permits that they need to have. Valley Township, for one, I think you replace a toilet and you have to get a permit. And I know I'm exaggerating, but it's similar to that. So make sure that they write in there any additions that they've done. They may say, well, I put that deck on, or the contractor put the deck on, and I don't think they got a permit from the township. Well, put that on there. Don't just leave it blank. They've got to, if they tell you You got to say, well, just put it on there. Were permits obtained? They may not know if they had a contractor do it, and they don't know if they did. Sometimes contractors don't maybe not give the permits to the seller, but they don't know, unknown. Or if it's no, write no, and just be straight up honest with them. I had a situation where the seller had their brother or whatever do the electrical work and never got a permit. And they did disclose that, and the township did come out, and we had to get an electrical master electrician, I think, to come through and look it over and give it the once over. And the seller had to do that, even though they disclosed they didn't get any permits. So they made them, because we have to be careful. We've heard horror stories. I don't know if you have, but I have, where if a basement's finished and they didn't get any electrical inspections or anything like that, the township makes them rip it out. So just a lot of times, and actually that opens up, and I'm sorry, I'm rambling on. I'm sorry about that, but it also opens up the thought of, what if they finish the basement without any permits? Like, that's a big problem. Like Euclid Township, some of those townships are very strict if the basement's finished and there's no permits on file. Now, I've heard, it hasn't happened to me, but I've heard some agents say that their seller had to rip out the stuff that was in the basement. Now, obviously, a buyer's not going to be happy with that, but I think a lot of times the townships will work with you to get those electrical inspections. What they're worried about is to make sure that it was done properly. It's not going to cause a fire. And so they may work with the seller to try to get the inspections done so that they don't have to rip out. Now, if the seller has to rip out, or if they got to do some things, they're going to have to put it back into its present condition, or the deal could fall apart. So you do have to be careful with finished basements. Just always protect yourself. Did you get a permit? Well, I don't know. The contractor did it. I'm assuming they did. So you can say basement finished and date of the work. Where permits obtained, you don't know. Or they know, or they know they got it. They know they don't. They have to be honest with what they do. Any thoughts on that? Did anybody ever have any issues with that? If something wasn't disclosed, or additions or anything like that, and the township came back at them?
I did just have that. They had a deck and a finished basement that weren't permitted. So my buyers asked them to get it permitted, and the township came in and they made them do some stuff up to code. And then they just issued the permit, so we were fine.
Well, that's
But
good.
now my buyers don't have to worry about it. If they go to sell, they have the permit.
So that's good. Did you do that after they were under contract?
Yes, it
Yeah.
was part of the inspection negotiation.
Yeah. So that's good, because then the township worked with the seller. They didn't make him rip it out. They just came in and made sure.
Yeah, they had to rip some stuff out, but I mean, it wasn't terrible.
They probably had to get back to where the electrical stuff was, right? I guess.
Yeah, there was like some doorways that weren't to code, I guess. And then the deck had some stuff that wasn't to code, but it wasn't anything terrible.
Major.
Yeah.
In this market, you do have to be careful, because you're up against so many other buyers. Do they call out some things like that? So that was good. They were already under contract, and then it was part of the inspection. What if you waived inspections and there's issues? So if the township is requiring a use and occupancy, it'll come up there, I would imagine, if the seller's paying for it. So you just have to be aware and make sure your buyers and sellers know what's going on. Disclose. Okay, I've beat that subject enough. Let's see. Does anybody know what a cistern is? Just curious if anybody knows what that is. I'm not even sure I know. That's terrible to say. I think it's like a hole in the ground where the water is, or there's like some kind of a holding thing for the well. Anyway, I'm sure nobody's got a cistern, so don't worry about it. Somebody Google that real quick and then tell me as I'm going. And then let's see. Obviously, any issues with the well, if they know of any issues, Septic system, make sure they fill this out properly. All these questions, they may not know. If you ever have a question, if you need to get information from the county, you can online, go to chesco.org, and I think it's the health department, and you can apply for the layout, like the plot plan, the layout information on the well and septic, as long as it is not older than, I think, 1960s, because I don't think they go back further than that. And they'll tell you pretty quickly, you'll get information within a couple of days, and it's free. They'll get information within a couple of days. It's very easy to do. And then you'll be able to get all the information. Sometimes the septic inspector will want that information before they go out, and sometimes it's good to have. So anybody can request it. And then let's see, tanks, the abandoned, any issues. I mean, really straight up be honest, septic system obviously is a very big ticket item. If it's a problem, they've never had any issues. If your seller says, I've had this happen too. Oh, I've never had any issues. I've never done anything with it. I've never had it pumped. I've never had any issues. And that's a major red flag, because septic systems are supposed to be maintained every couple of years. Sometimes townships now are requiring that. So if there's any issues, it'll come up in the inspection. Also, one little side note on the septic inspections, if you're taking a listing, they say, oh, we'll empty it now. Don't. Just wait until the septic inspection is done, because it will most likely need the seller to empty the septic tank as part of and finishing the inspection. And it is written in the agreement of sale that the seller has to pay for that. The seller has to pay for any septic tank removal, or the last service, whatever, emptied. So just make sure that they don't do it right then before they go on the market. A lot of people think they should do that. Then they're going to have to do it again, especially if they're living in there. Another day, you talk about, anybody has any questions on hydraulic load test, that kind of thing. Sometimes that comes up in inspections. It has nothing to do with the disclosure here, but the hydraulic load test is if you have a family of 2 living there and a family of 4 or 5 are moving in, you got to test the system to make sure that it's working properly. So I went sideways there for a second. Let's keep going. Plumbing, a lot of people don't know their plumbing system. They really just don't. You see a lot of unknowns. The polybutylene, we're very rarely seeing that anymore. That was the piping that had an issue and was always failing. And if anybody has the polybutylene, you can Google that, and there's a website, I believe you can get help with financial help with having that replaced in your house if it was built, since it was the material failed so much. Let's see, water heating system. Make sure everything's all filled out on the heating system. Is it hot air? Any stoves? Chimneys. Make sure they fill out, sometimes people forget they have a chimney, say for the oil burner. Make sure they put all the, if they have two chimneys, but only one working fireplace, make sure they put both chimneys on there. Are they working? And listen, here's the other thing with fireplaces, they might say, well, I've never used the fireplace, so I think it's working. You can, if they haven't used the fireplace in 10 years, have them write that in here. Haven't used fireplace in 10 years. That way they've disclosed that if there's a problem, they worked then, they're not aware of a problem, but they haven't used it in 10 years. So they should have it inspected or have it looked at. When were they last cleaned? Go ahead.
I did one of my continuing educations on this document, and so I pulled up the thing back on the heating system.
Yeah.
If you have solar, they had it starred to make sure does the seller own it, or is it leased or something? Good
point right here. Solar, shingles, or panels. Is the system owned by the seller? Other. That's a really good point. We just had an agent go through that, and let me just tell you what happened with that. The seller did disclose on here that it was leased. Okay, it was on the disclosure that it was leased and that it was, the new buyer had to take over the lease. But it wasn't on the offer. It wasn't on the agreement of sale. That wording was not on the agreement of sale, that the buyer would agree to take over the lease. Now, the agreement of sale supersedes the disclosure. So the buyer was like, I'm not taking that on. And the seller was like, we disclosed it. So they battled back and forth. They had an attorney. I mean, it could have gotten really ugly. They ended up working it out. But the seller had to pay some money to the buyer to work it out. So that's a good point, Jen. Thanks for bringing that up. But also the point is, if it's on the disclosure, it has to be on the agreement of sale. Okay. So I know it's hard. We got to, 10 offers, 5 offers, whatever. Oh, I forgot that. She just totally missed it. She could have gotten in trouble, herself for that. But if they worked it out, so that's good. But that was very stressful. And look, I've done that. I've missed something on a disclosure. We've all done it, or maybe y'all haven't done it, but I know I've done it. And I had to pay some money to fix what I forgot to put on the agreement of sale. It was on the disclosure, it was not on the agreement of sale. Totally forgot. So just be very careful. But good point. Thank you, Jen. And get all that paperwork, by the way. It's just same thing with anything that's leased. On the agreement of sale, what's leased? Is it the propane tanks leased? Is it, whatever, solar panels? I've had a alarm system leased one time. That was ridiculous. That was a long time ago. Did anybody have any other thoughts on that? Okay, so let's see. Status not heated. Fireplaces and chimneys. Fuel tanks. Let's talk about fuel tanks for a second. I just kind of tapped into this, so I want to reiterate this real quick. Although I know it's on the inclusions on the agreement of sale, but please make sure that your sellers know that any fuel in any fuel tank stays, and there's no reimbursement back, even if it's a leased propane tank. And most times buyers know that they'll prorate and the seller will get a credit, but it doesn't happen all the time. So whether it's a leased propane tank, an owned propane tank, oil tank, make sure if it's on autofill, if it gets filled, a week before settlement, and they're not getting reimbursed back at settlement for it. So just know that any heating fuels stay on the property. Okay. All right. Let's see what else is here. By the way, at the bottom of every section, it says, are you aware of any problems with this section? Yes or no. And then don't let them just click yes and then leave it blank. If it's yes, they got to fill it out. The electrical system, a lot of times people don't know what their amperage is. A lot of times you can just you can help them and look on the electric box, and you can see the number on the main switch. If it says 100 or 200, you know that it's, service. But if they don't know, then just put unknown. Now, if I'm going to go sideways here for a second. If you know that the township does require use and occupancy on a resale, and you see an electrical box and it doesn't have a sticker on it that was signed off by a master electrician, that's going to get called out. You're going to have somebody come out, do an inspection, put a sticker on it, and off you go. And that's going to be to the tune of $100, $125. So take a look when you're looking at the property, look at the electrical box, take a peek, see what's going on. Look at the numbers on the main switch, look to see if there's any stickers. And any electrical box that is installed really is supposed to have that sticker. It's supposed to have that final inspection. A lot of times it won't because, their cousin, whatever, did it. Cousin Bobby, the electrician, did it and didn't put a sticker on it. Okay. Let's see.
It's the same thing in that section. If it's solar powered, is it leased?
Oh, right. There you go. Good point. So it's in both sections. Okay. So here's the other part. This is the part I want to spend a little time on, and then I'll hand it over to Kim. This is the section that changed, and not everybody knows this section changed. And this used to be the section where it said, is this, in the property, is it, whether it's staying or not, is it in the property? Now it says this section identify problems or repairs. So I think Kim had told me that she saw one that everything was checked yes. So they obviously didn't read it and it was filled out wrong. So whatever was checked yes. They are thinking that it was staying. But what this means is there any problems with it? So don't be afraid to go back to the listing agent and ask them to correct it. Joke around about it, be nice about it, because they missed something. Everybody's busy. Things are stressful. Hey, by the way, do you realize your seller checked yes for everything not working on all their systems? Can you just kind of redo that, please? Just redo that page. So please, please, please know that this says it's intended to identify problems or repairs and must be completed for each item that will or may be included with the property. The terms of the agreement of sale negotiated will determine which items, if any, are included in the purchase price. The fact that an item is listed does not mean it is included in the agreement. I don't normally like reading things to you guys, but I believe that was a very important one to read. So just because it's here, if it's not on the agreement of sale supersedes the disclosure. The agreement of sale is be all end all. So if you've got a listing and you've got offers on your listing and they didn't put in the wording for the solar, make sure they put the wording in for the solar, or make sure they put whatever's included. Any thoughts, any questions on that?
Yeah, in that class, again, they spent a lot of time on it because since it changed, people don't realize they're asking if you don't have it put not applicable. They're not saying, do you have an air conditioning window unit? Yes or no. It's if you have one, is there a problem? So if you don't have a window, you put not applicable.
Good point. So basically people are saying, oh, I don't have a window applicable. No.
Or yes, I do have one.
Right. So the question is, are there any problems and repairs? Are you aware of any problems or repairs needed to any of the following? That's this line right here. It's so little too. They should have made that bold. So are there any problems with this? Yes or no? And then you're right, NA if it's not included.
If you don't have it.
Right, or I'm sorry, yeah, if it's not in the house, if you don't have it.
Because they actually had us fill out one for our own homes in the class and then went over for it. So
that's an interesting thing to do. That would be a fun thing to do. That's your homework if you want to fill one out for your house that you live in and know how hard it is to fill it out.
The stress there is like my deck was redone. I don't have a permit. Well, I feel like I should fit there, Oh yeah, I had a permit. Oh no, that deck's been there. The wood looks new. Oh, we power washed it.
Right.
Like that's where it's like, well, I don't want to write that because then what's going to happen? Are they going to make me take it down?
Maybe. Well, trust me though, if it all goes to settlement and they start talking to the neighbor's going to tell them everything. Oh yeah, they put that deck up 2 years ago. Trust me on that one. Neighbors know.
You've seen my situation. Nobody knows anything I do back here.
All right, so we're going to carry on. I think let me just go through this real quick. We're getting towards the end. I don't know if there was anything else on the agreement of sale. If you don't know if a property is in a flood zone, you can look that up on public records.
Isn't that in Bright also?
Well, yeah, that's public records in Bright.
Oh.
Yes. And I'm dealing with something right now on a boundary issue, a house I'm getting ready to list. The neighbor's fence is on our property and my seller found the pins and put stakes on them. And the neighbor next door just bought the house and they're trying to sue the seller. And I was like, get that fence down before you go on the market. Otherwise, we're going to have to disclose. I said, well, I think we're going to disclose anyway that, hey, there was a dispute with the next door neighbor when they bought their house, just so they know, because trust me, again, that neighbor's gonna tell this person, oh, our fence was here and this happened, da, 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 da. And if our new buyer doesn't know anything about it, so we're gonna disclose on that. So anyway, just if you're not sure, the surveys are not required in Pennsylvania, but the buyer has the right to have a survey done if they have any questions or any concerns on that. Let's see. Just don't forget the miscellaneous questions. And then obviously just fill it out properly. Now, one thing real quick, I'm just going to show you, there is an addendum to this seller's disclosure. I always give this with my disclosure and I say, hey, look, if you don't need this, fine. However, if you're starting to fill something out and you need more room, this form is for that. Now, you've seen sometimes where people also write something on a sheet of paper and list a few things. That's fine too. If they have a list of extras, upgrades, or whatever they want, they have a list of, upgrades that they did, that's fine. But just know that this addendum is here. And I always just print this out along with it. And then also, if the property is built prior to 1978, make sure the lead paint, I don't think I have it on here, make sure the lead paint addendum is part of the disclosure as well. And they've got to fill that out properly. So I think everybody knows about the lead paint. So I'm going to stop sharing here. So any questions on that disclosure? I did kind of a quick review of it. All right, Kim, if you don't mind, Kim is going to talk to us about Seller's Shield. I don't know do you have it pulled up? You're going to share your screen, Kim, or
Yeah, I
can talk about it. Does everybody know the Seller's Shield? Everybody, you've heard of it? So you got to write it down, Seller's Shield.
So Seller Shield is something that's super valuable as a listing agent for your sellers to fill out, because it leads them, like holds their hand step by step through filling out the entire disclosure. And there's less chance of them making a mistake. And it also will highlight areas where most lawsuits are, like dampness in the basement or whatever. So it will alert your sellers like, hey, try to be honest on this part because you could get yourself in trouble. And this way you don't have to do it. Seller Shield is doing it. But if you're in your Zip Forms account and you're in your transactions tab, actually you could be in any tab, but the partners tab, if you click on it, scroll all the way down right here, Seller Shield. I have an account, so all I have to do is click sign in, but if you don't have an account, it's probably sign up, and it's free. You don't have to pay for it. So this is the screen that'll come up, and you can import your transaction straight from Zip Forms if you're doing like a listing contract, and you just fill this in.
Kim,
Yeah.
sorry. The pop-up isn't showing. I think you might have selected your Chrome window instead of your entire screen. So it's only showing us Zip Forms right now still. So you should, if you go to your screen sharing options, you should be able to switch screens. And then just make sure that you choose the one where it's got the entire screen and all apps instead of just Chrome. Okay, perfect. Yeah, now we see it.
You see that now? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So here's where you invite your sellers, and you can hit this blue button to import from Zip. And it'll import the property. Sorry, it's so loud. You just put in the seller's information, and if you have 2 sellers, you just hit an additional seller, fill them in, and then you click which forms that you want to send them. And it will know, like I'm a Maryland agent too, so if the property is in Maryland, the Maryland forms will show up here as well. So you click the ones you want to send, you hit continue. I can't do it because it won't let you do a test. But it will guide, and I can show you I think it's gonna happen again. What the seller will see, because I thought that was important to see how they were going through it. It wouldn't let me send myself a test one because of my email address,
I
but
think it is happening again because we are still seeing the seller's shield.
yeah, well, I haven't clicked it yet.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Are you seeing it now?
Yep, seeing it. now.
Okay, you see the video?
Yep.
Yes?
Yes.
So what does
Okay.
the seller see? When an agent invites a home seller to the interactive disclosure form, the client receives an access email introducing them to the process and with a link to their pre-created account. The client chooses a password and is then taken to a personalized agent landing page, which expresses 3 important points specifically designed to fulfill the agent's fiduciary duty and provide the highest standard of care. It explains that the disclosure forms are legal documents. It explains that when home sale lawsuits occur, they almost always are due to issues with the disclosure, and that optional home sale legal protection is available to them if they choose. More on this later. From there, the client enters the interactive disclosure forms. The client has constant access to the Smart Seller tools, which include our legal tips and instructional video. Both tools highlight issues most frequently cited in lawsuits and provide straightforward advice on how to prevent disclosure mistakes. As they complete the form, our legal wizard provides useful information and tips throughout. For instance, in this question about settling, it lets them know this is a common problem area causing lawsuits. It also defines terms such as what is settling and provides example answers for the seller's reference. Our expandable fields allow sellers to disclose as much information as they like without being limited by the space provided on the traditional handwritten forms. At any time, the seller can click the Add Protection button to purchase home sale legal protection, which provides paid legal representation by experienced real estate attorneys in the event of a claim. This is important because agents, brokers, inspectors, and title all have E&O insurance that protects them in the transaction, but the seller's, homeowners, and umbrella insurance policies don't protect sellers against home sale claims. Once the seller is finished filling out the forms, they will need to review and sign the disclosure. At any time, the home seller can log back into their dashboard and make any changes or edits necessary. Once signed, a custom formatted, legible, and fully complete PDF is stored in both the seller and agent dashboards.
So it's like, it makes it very easy for the sellers and explains everything along the way. And it's free. So I think that, it's something we should probably be using. And then you can also purchase coverage for your sellers. If you wanted to, that could be a negotiating tool. If you're trying to win the listing, it's something other agents probably aren't doing. And I think it's $199 for a year. So it's not that bad if you want to use that as in your listing materials as something that you do. Or if you're negotiating and they're saying, well, what are you going to do for me? You could throw that in there as well. But I think it's important to make sure they're filling it out right. It's also important to make sure that the seller's disclosures that your buyers are signing are filled out properly as well, because you could also be liable for buyers who have signed off on disclosures because they weren't told something. I don't know if I'll be able to.
So did you hear what you said? You as a buyer's agent could be responsible for a seller's disclosure that your buyer signed and it wasn't filled out properly.
Yeah, I have there's a lawsuit against a buyer's agent. And I have a copy of it here where the seller's disclosure wasn't filled out properly by the seller. The buyer's agent didn't point it out to the buyer that the seller checked yes about flooding, but didn't explain why or anything about it. And then after the buyers moved in, they found out that there was flooding for years or whatever, and they opened a lawsuit against the listing agent and the buyer's agent for not pointing out that the seller's disclosure had not been filled out properly. So I think it's important. I mean, I've done this where you just forward the seller's, you quick check through it, you forward it and say, hey, here's the seller's disclosure. Let me know if you have any questions. They sign off on it. and you maybe have missed something like this. So I think it's important that not only are we having our sellers fill out the seller's disclosure properly, but we're also making sure that our buyers are being educated on it as well. Yes,
That's a good point. You want to just stop sharing for a second?
yeah.
Or if you're done with that? Okay, thanks. So I remember one of the Rev Up classes last year, somebody was talking about how to get the listings and being a good listing agent and all that. And they part of their listing packet is they sit there and they explain what they do for the seller and why it's important. They paid for the 1 year coverage on that seller shield and said, look, you're covered if there's any issues for a year under any lawsuits. You know how much a lawsuit could be if you accidentally did something wrong here and they take you to court? I'm offering you protection. And that person said, I don't think it was very rare that they lost a listing. The sellers didn't know that this service was out there. So it helps you stand apart, I think, if you're up against other agents trying to get a listing.
Yeah, it makes it look like you care about the seller.
And look, you don't want to get sued either. I mean, that lawsuit, of course, they're going to pull both agents in and they may end up finding the buyer agent responsible because they just sue everybody. They just pull everybody into the lawsuit and they try to hope to settle. They pull 5 people in and they get $5,000 from each person. There's $25,000 that they were trying to get, that's how they
Yeah.
do lawsuits. So if anybody's an attorney, sorry, my sister-in-law is, but she'll probably agree with me on that one.
Can we attach this case study to the email that goes out later? Because it's interesting to read through why they found the buyer's agent liable and everything. It's
So
just
that-
interesting.
Did that end up, they ended up finding the buyer's agent liable? There was a listing agent liable too on that? Did they come to a decision on it?
They have not come to a decision
Okay,
yet,
they're still
but
talking about it.
yeah, so initially it was thrown out, the buyers appealed, and the buyer's agent was pulled back into the suit.
Ugh.
Yeah, so,
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, definitely. That would be great to look at that. So,
yeah,
okay. Well, does anybody else have any questions on anything? So thank you, Kim, for that. I didn't really know Seller Shield was out there until like a year or so ago. And
yeah. You can get to it, you can just type in Seller Shield too. You don't have to go through zip forms. Just
It's
create
nice.
an account. Yeah,
it's nice that it's there, part of Zip Forms,
yeah, and you
Like
can
that it's-
import,
that it's free
right.
for the seller to fill out. And then the seller has an option if they want to purchase coverage.
And when the seller's done, you get an email saying they're done, so you can go in and download the documents to your file.
Does it, I wonder, I've probably seen those. And they're probably nice and neat too. So you don't
They're
have the
very
seller-
neat.
you don't have the seller's handwriting that you can't read.
Exactly.
Now, if you have a seller that's not tech savvy and doesn't want to do it on the computer, that's fine. But it's just another option out there and it makes you more professional. CYA, get it done properly. So all good.